At 85 years old, Smokey Robinson has finally broken a silence that lasted more than 60 years. And what he's revealing about Diana Ross isn't just about an affair.
What's the name of the next song?
It's called The Agony and the Ecstasy.
Let us do it. Ladies and gentlemen, Smokey Robinson!
This goes deeper than anyone imagined. 3 lives were destroyed in the process, a best friendship shattered, and a marriage obliterated by a love triangle nobody saw coming. The woman Smokey loved in secret didn't just walk away from him.
Martha was Mickey's secretary, and Mickey got her and the 2 girls that she was singing with on the side.
She walked straight into the arms of Berry Gordy, the man who stood as godfather to Smokey's own son, his best friend, the person he trusted most in the world. Now, facing the end of his life and with his legacy hanging in the balance, Smokey Robinson admits what really happened in the shadows of Motown and why the choices he made back then still haunt him today. William Robinson Jr. entered the world on February 19, 1940 in Detroit, Michigan, and from his earliest memories, abandonment seemed to follow him everywhere. His parents left when he remained young. His mother died when Smokey turned just 10 years old. Suddenly living with his older sister and trying to make sense of a world that kept taking people away from him. 4 houses down that same Detroit street lived a little girl named Diana Ross.
See, we would sing at the recreation center and at school and on the corner. We went anywhere there were some girls.
8 years old when Smokey first knew her. Both of them growing up in the kind of poverty that either breaks you or teaches you to fight for every dream you can grab. The neighborhood they grew up in wasn't the kind of place where people expected much success. Most kids from those Detroit blocks ended up working factory jobs or struggling to survive. But Smokey and Diana both carried something different burning inside them. A hunger for something bigger, something beyond the limitations their circumstances tried to impose. They watched each other grow up, saw each other's dreams take shape, formed the kind of childhood bond that feels unbreakable because neither person knows yet how complicated adult life can become. Motown rose around them in those days, Berry Gordy building an empire that would change American music forever. And Smokey Robinson stood there from the beginning with his group, The Miracles. In 1959, when Smokey turned just 19 years old, he married Claudette Robinson, a fellow Miracles member whose voice blended perfectly with his. For a moment, everything felt complete. Music, check. Love, check. A family forming, check. And Berry Gordy as his best friend and mentor. The man who believed in him when nobody else did. Who saw genius in a teenage kid carrying a notebook full of songs to an audition. Diana Ross remained young then, still trying to break into the music business with these, still dreaming of stages and spotlights that seemed impossibly far away. When she came to Smokey asking for help in the early 1960s, he didn't hesitate. Brought her to Motown, introduced her to Berry Gordy, became her mentor and guide through a business that could chew up young talent and spit it out without a second thought. She trusted him completely. Claudette trusted him completely. Berry Gordy trusted him completely. What nobody knew, trust, once broken, can never quite be put back together the same way. The foundations were already cracking beneath the surface. Hairline fractures spreading through relationships that looked solid from the outside. And Smokey Robinson, the man who wrote love songs that made millions of people cry, stood about to discover that real love is far messier, far more painful, and far more destructive than anything he could ever capture in 3 minutes of melody and rhyme. Somewhere in the early 1960s. When Diana Ross kept finding her footing and the Supremes were still climbing towards superstardom, something shifted between her and Smokey Robinson. Working together almost daily created proximity. She remained young and trying to figure out her career. He held marriage vows and established status. According to Smokey himself, it just happened. No planning, no grand seduction. Just 2 people in close proximity who suddenly crossed a line they could never uncross. The affair lasted approximately 1 year. Smokey described it decades later as beautiful. They remained careful, stayed discreet, kept working together while hiding what occurred behind closed doors. And the tension must have felt unbearable because Claudette existed there too, still performing with the miracles, still trusting her husband, still believing in the marriage they'd built together. Diana was young, maybe 20 years old when this started, still figuring out who she was and what she wanted. And Smokey stood as the established star who'd helped bring her to Motown in the first place. The power dynamic alone should have stopped this before it started. Desire doesn't work that way. It doesn't care about appropriate boundaries or professional ethics, or the people who'll get hurt when the truth eventually comes out. Smokey and Diana worked together in recording studios, saw each other at Motown offices daily, collaborated on music and career strategy. Somewhere in the middle of all that professional interaction, they became something more than mentor and student, more than friends. Something they both knew stood wrong but couldn't seem to stop. But here's what's curious about how it ended. Diana Ross made the decision to walk away. Smokey revealed this years later, explaining that after they'd been seeing each other for a while, Diana came to him and said she couldn't continue because she knew Claudette, knew Smokey, still loved his wife, and respected that too much to keep going. Diana ended the affair not because the feelings weren't real, but because the situation stood impossible, and she understood that someone was going to get hurt no matter what they chose. That decision showed a maturity and moral clarity that Smokey himself never quite managed to find, because Diana could have kept going, could have pushed for Smokey to leave his wife, could have made this messier than it already stood, but instead she walked away. Smokey admitted something crucial when he finally talked about this publicly in 2023. He loved his wife very much, even while involved with Diana. That confession revealed what would become the central tragedy of his entire life. He discovered he held capacity for loving two women at the same time, genuinely and deeply loving both of them. And that realization destroyed any simple narrative about betrayal or mistakes or one true love. This wasn't about Smokey choosing between two women. This centered on Smokey wanting both and believing somehow he could make that work without wrecking everything around him. Claudette had no idea yet what had happened, still trying to start a family with Smokey, still dealing with the physical and emotional devastation of miscarriage after miscarriage, still believing her husband remained faithful and devoted. The first betrayal had already occurred. The damage was already done. The lie lived between them like a third person in their marriage, but the pain hadn't caught up to her yet. She kept trusting, kept hoping, kept giving everything she had to a man who was keeping secrets that would eventually destroy her. And Diana Ross, having ended things with Smokey out of respect for his marriage, stood about to make a choice that would turn this private affair into something far more complicated and far more painful for everyone involved. What Smokey Robinson didn't expect came next. And this is where the story stops being about a simple affair and becomes about the kind of betrayal that changes people permanently. Diana Ross, shortly after ending her relationship with Smokey, began a romantic involvement with Berry Gordy, the founder of Motown Records. Smokey's boss, more importantly, his best friend. Their relationship lasted from 1965 to 1970, spanning 5 years and becoming one of the defining romances of the Motown era. It wasn't hidden from Smokey. He had to watch it happen in real time. Had to see the woman he loved choosing the man he trusted most. Had to smile and act professional while his heart was breaking. The cruel mathematics of this triangle are hard to overstate because these weren't strangers. 3 people who'd built Motown together, shared dreams and success and countless hours working side by side. Berry Gordy had mentored Smokey since 1957 when a teenage Smokey walked into an audition with a notebook full of songs, pages worn at the edges from constant flipping. And Berry saw genius where others saw just another kid from Detroit trying to make it in the music business.
When most of us have known each other over 50 years, that's incredible.
Their friendship had lasted over a decade by the time Diana and Berry got together, built on mutual respect and genuine affection and the kind of trust that comes from struggling together through the early years when nobody knew if Motown would survive or collapse. Now, Smokey had to navigate that relationship while carrying the secret of what he and Diana had shared, watching them fall in love, pretending everything remained fine, attending Motown events where Diana and Berry would be together publicly while Smokey stood there with Claudette, his wife, who still didn't know about any of this. The psychological torture of that situation is hard to imagine. Loving someone who chose your best friend, working with both of them every day, maintaining professionalism while everything inside you is screaming. But the real devastation came in 1968 when Smokey and Claudette finally had their first child after 7 miscarriages that had nearly destroyed them both, emotionally and physically. Claudette's body couldn't carry a pregnancy to term. Her cervix would open too early and she'd lose the baby. After the 7th miscarriage, they turned to a surrogate, a woman who would carry their biological child and give them the family they'd been desperately trying to build for years. When their son arrived healthy and perfect, Smokey made a decision that seemed natural at the time but would become incredibly painful in retrospect. He named the boy Berry Robinson, a tribute to the man who'd given him his career, the man who'd believed in him from the beginning. His closest friend in the world, Berry Gordy, became the child's godfather, stood at the naming ceremony, and accepted the honor while carrying his own secret, his ongoing relationship with Diana Ross. That had been going on for 3 years at that point. The interconnections between these 4 people had become so tangled that separating personal from professional, love from loyalty, truth from deception stood essentially impossible. 2 years later, in 1970, Diana Ross became pregnant. The father was Berry Gordy. She gave birth to a daughter named Rhonda on August 14th, 1971. Let that sink in for a moment because this is the emotional core of the entire tragedy. Smokey Robinson had to witness the woman he'd loved, the woman he'd brought to Motown himself, the woman who'd ended their affair out of respect for his marriage, get pregnant with and have a child by the man who stood as godfather to his own son. The betrayal wasn't just romantic, it was familial, woven into the fabric of his most intimate relationships and his proudest moment as a father. No way to escape it or avoid it or pretend it wasn't happening. Diana married Robert Ellis Silberstein. Just 2 months into her pregnancy with Rhonda, Silberstein raised the girl as his own daughter, even though he knew Berry Gordy was her biological father. The whole situation had become a web of secrets and complicated relationships and people, trying to protect each other while simultaneously hurting each other. Years later, when Smokey was asked about this period, he tried to frame it philosophically, talking about how we're all capable of loving more than one person, how society makes it taboo, but the feelings are real and uncontrollable. What he didn't say directly, but what hangs over every word. The devastation of watching Berry and Diana build something together, have a child together, while his own marriage to Claudette was secretly falling apart under the weight of lies she didn't even know about yet. The triangle was complete now. Smokey had betrayed Claudette with Diana. Diana had moved on to Berry. Berry had become central to Smokey's family life, while being romantically involved with the woman Smokey still carried feelings for 3 people who loved each other in different ways. All of them hurting each other without meaning to. All of them trapped in a situation where honesty would destroy everything, but silence was destroying them anyway. While Smokey navigated his complicated feelings about Diana and Berry, Claudette Robinson lived through her own private nightmare, and nobody paid attention to her suffering because nobody knew it existed yet. She'd survived 7 miscarriages before finally having children. 7 times her body failed to carry a pregnancy. 7 times she experienced the physical pain and emotional devastation of losing a baby she'd already started loving and planning for. The medical trauma alone would break most people. Claudette kept trying, kept hoping, kept believing that if she just held on long enough, she and Smokey could have the family they dreamed about. Through all of that suffering, she believed her husband remained faithful and supportive and honest with her. Had no idea that years earlier, while she still performed with the miracles and tried to start their family, Smokey had been involved with Diana Ross. Had no idea that the woman she knew professionally, the young singer Smokey had mentored and brought to Motown, had been sleeping with her husband. She trusted Smokey completely, That trust made the eventual revelation even more devastating because it meant years of her life had been built on a lie. In 1974, more than a decade after Smokey's affair with Diana had ended, Claudette finally discovered the truth. The discovery shattered whatever remained of her trust in her husband. The details of how she found out aren't public, but the impact was immediate and catastrophic. They separated temporarily. Claudette needed space to process the betrayal and figure out if the marriage could possibly survive this kind of fundamental breach of trust. The pain must have felt unbearable, not just because of the affair itself, but because of the timing. She'd been going through miscarriages and medical trauma while Smokey was involved with another woman. He'd never told her, never given her the choice about whether to forgive him or leave him. Just kept the secret and let her keep trusting him. The following year, in 1975, Smokey Robinson released a song called The Agony and the Ecstasy on his album A Quiet Storm, although he never confirmed it publicly. Everyone who heard the lyrics understood what he was really singing about. The song describes forbidden love, the guilt of wanting someone while belonging to someone else, the impossible mathematics of the heart that demands you pay for pleasure with pain. The lyrics are explicit about the situation, asking how two worlds became entwined when one person already belongs to someone else, describing how something that started as fun turned into love, and now both people are paying a forbidden lover's price. One particular line cuts deeper than the rest. He sings "Cause love, like ours is never, ever free. You got to pay some agony for the ecstasy." Those words became Claudette's torture because she had to hear her husband's confession of infidelity playing on every radio station across America. The song became a hit. People loved it for its honesty and emotional depth. Nobody except the people involved understood that Claudette was having her private humiliation broadcasts to millions of listeners who had no idea they were witnessing the soundtrack to a marriage falling apart. Imagine that for a moment. Your husband betrays you with another woman. You separate because the pain feels unbearable. Then he releases a song about that betrayal that becomes a hit. Everywhere you go, every car you pass, every store you walk into, every party you attend, there's your private pain being turned into entertainment. Claudette Robinson endured that, stayed silent about it, maintained her dignity and professionalism, while Smokey turned their suffering into art that made him even more famous and respected. But the destruction didn't end there. Smokey Robinson had learned absolutely nothing from the pain he'd caused. In 1984, while still married to Claudette, he got another woman pregnant. Her name was Candy. She gave birth to a son named Trey Robinson. That same year, this wasn't a brief affair that ended decades ago. This was active, ongoing betrayal. Smokey fathering a child with another woman while his wife was at home, believing they'd moved past the Diana Ross situation and rebuilt their marriage. When Claudette found out about Trey's existence, something inside her finally broke in a way that couldn't be repaired. She'd forgiven the affair with Diana, tried to rebuild trust, stayed through the humiliation of The Agony and the Ecstasy becoming a hit song. Now she was discovering that her forgiveness and her loyalty meant nothing because Smokey had just done it again. Got another woman pregnant. Created another child outside their marriage. What happened next says everything about Claudette's character and nothing good about Smokey's. Despite the betrayal, despite the humiliation, despite having every reason to walk away and never look back and tell Smokey to deal with his mess on his own, Claudette agreed to help raise Trey, maintained a civil relationship with Candy, treated the child with kindness and acceptance because none of this was the boy's fault. Tried to hold together some version of a family even though Smokey had blown apart any conventional definition of what family means. The divorce finally came in 1986, ending 27 years of marriage. When Smokey talked about it later, he admitted something that made it even worse. He filed for divorce because he didn't love Claudette anymore. Because he was addicted to cocaine. Not because he felt guilty about the betrayals. Not because he wanted to spare her more pain. His feelings had changed, and his drug addiction had consumed him to the point where he couldn't maintain even the pretense of being a decent husband. Claudette had given him 27 years.
So I said, Mary Wells. And so I got on the phone and said, hey, what's up, baby? She said, Smoke, she said, you need to make Claudette come home.
Survived multiple betrayals. Helped raise his child from another woman. His response, walk away because he'd stopped loving her and was too busy getting high to care about the destruction he left behind. Most people assumed that after the 1986 divorce, Smokey and Claudette had settled their business and moved on with separate lives, maybe maintaining a cordial relationship for the sake of their children, but otherwise done with each other. That assumption was completely wrong. In 2014, a full 28 years after their marriage ended, Claudette Robinson filed a lawsuit against her ex-husband that revealed just how deep and how permanent the damage really stood. She accused him of fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, deliberately hiding valuable copyright assets during their divorce proceedings back in 1986. The legal details matter here because they show this wasn't just about money or a bitter ex-wife trying to extract more from a wealthy ex. This centered on recognition and justice and the fundamental question of whether Smokey had been honest during their divorce or whether he led and cheated his way to keeping assets that should have been split with Claudette. She alleged that Smokey had failed to disclose certain copyright termination rights during their 1986 divorce, rights that would eventually allow him to reclaim ownership of songs he'd written during their marriage and collect 100% of the royalties going forward instead of sharing them. Under California's community property law, anything created or earned during a marriage belongs equally to both spouses, which means that songs Smokey wrote while married to Claudette should be considered jointly owned property. The copyright termination provision in the 1976 Copyright Act allows songwriters to reclaim their copyrights after 35 years, taking them back from music publishers and record labels. The question Claudette raised, were those reclaimed copyrights still subject to the community property rules from the original marriage? Smokey's attorneys fought back hard, argued that copyright termination rights didn't exist as concrete assets in 1986, so he couldn't have disclosed them during the divorce. Said that Claudette was trying to retroactively claim ownership of something that wasn't part of the original divorce settlement, attempting to use copyright law to get around the finalized divorce agreement and grab a piece of royalties. She had no legal right to claim, but Claudette's lawyers countered with a devastating argument. They said Smokey had committed constructive fraud by not mentioning even the possibility that he might one day be able to reclaim those rights, essentially hiding a future asset from his wife during divorce negotiations and giving himself an unfair advantage. They argued that Smokey, as a sophisticated music industry professional who understood copyright law better than most people, carried a fiduciary duty to disclose this potential future income stream to Claudette. His failure to do so stood fraudulent and should void that portion of their divorce agreement. The lawsuit exposed something painful and true. Even nearly 3 decades after their marriage ended, Claudette Robinson was still fighting for recognition of everything she'd endured. She wasn't just some ex-wife trying to grab money from a famous musician. She was the woman who'd stood by Smokey through the early struggling years when the Miracles were trying to get signed and nobody knew if they'd make it. The woman who'd performed with him and contributed to the group's success. The woman who'd suffered 7 miscarriages trying to give him children. The woman who'd raised his son from another woman with grace and dignity. The woman who'd watched him turn their private pain into hit songs while she remained silent. The woman who'd been lied to and betrayed repeatedly and then divorced when Smokey decided he didn't love her anymore. The pattern of Smokey's life had become clear by this point. It wasn't the romantic narrative he tried to sell about loving multiple people simultaneously and how society's rules are too restrictive for the complexity of human emotion. He'd lost Diana Ross because she chose Berry Gordy, the man who stood as godfather to Smokey's son, his best friend, the person he should have been able to trust above almost anyone else. Lost Claudette because he destroyed her through repeated betrayals, through public humiliation via the Agony and the Ecstasy, through fathering children with other women, and then through admitting he simply didn't love her anymore. So the 27 years she'd given him meant nothing in the end. Lost his true friendship with Berry Gordy because even if they remained professionally cordial and appeared together at Motown events, The loyalty and trust and genuine affection that defined their early relationship could never be the same after everything that happened with Diana, and he'd lost his own self-respect. Admitted years later that cocaine addiction had consumed him during this period and driven many of his worst decisions, using drugs as an escape from the complicated mess he'd created instead of facing it honestly and trying to make amends. Achi this moment standing in a courtroom fighting his ex-wife over copyrights and royalties and accusations of fraud. Smokey Robinson had to face the full accounting of what his choices had cost. This wasn't just about one affair or one mistake made in a moment of weakness. This was about a man who'd loved two women at once and destroyed them both in the process, valued his own desires over everyone else's well-being, betrayed the people who trusted him most. Now, in his 70s and 80s, still dealing with the consequences of decisions he'd made 40 and 50 years earlier, the past doesn't stay in the past when you've hurt people this deeply. It follows you and demands payment and keeps showing up decades later in courtrooms and interviews and moments when you have to finally admit what you did and who you hurt and what it all cost. In April 2023, at 83 years old, Smokey Robinson sat down for an interview with The Guardian to promote his new album titled Gasms. Yes, he was releasing an album about orgasms at 83 years old. During that conversation, he finally admitted publicly what many people had suspected for decades. He and Diana Ross had been involved in an affair for approximately 1 year while he remained married to Claudette. They'd been working together when it happened. According to Smokey, it was beautiful. He used that exact word, beautiful, to describe a relationship that had helped destroy his marriage and caused immeasurable pain to a woman who'd done nothing wrong except trust her husband. He explained that Diana was the one who ended the relationship, told him she couldn't continue because she knew Claudette and knew Smokey still loved his wife. Then Smokey said something that revealed how he'd rationalized everything over the years. He claimed he'd learned that humans are capable of loving more than one person at the same time. Society makes this taboo, but the feelings are natural and uncontrollable. He framed his betrayal as a profound realization about human nature rather than what it actually was. A series of selfish choices that prioritized his desires over everyone else's pain. When pressed about whether his 1975 song The Agony and the Ecstasy was written about Diana, Smokey deflected, said he couldn't possibly have experienced everything he'd written about as a songwriter. That the song seemed like a good idea because many people were in that situation. He neither confirmed nor denied it directly, maintained just enough deniability that he could avoid taking full responsibility. His careful non-answer told everyone what they needed to know. Of course, the song was about Diana. Anyone who listened to the lyrics understood that immediately. Smokey still couldn't bring himself to say it plainly, even at 83 years old. By February 2025, at 84 years old, Smokey kept talking about Diana with obvious affection, told interviewers he'd known her since she was 8 years old, called her precious, his longest living friend, his baby. The possessive language struck hard, coming from a man who'd watched her choose his best friend over him more than 50 years earlier, as if time had erased the complications and pain and left only the warm glow of nostalgia. Then in May 2025, new complications emerged when former employees filed sexual harassment lawsuits against Smokey and his current wife, Frances, alleged inappropriate behavior and abuse of power. His legacy, carefully constructed over 6 decades as the smooth-voiced romantic who wrote My Girl and Tracks of My Tears and dozens of other classic love songs, suddenly stood in jeopardy. People asked uncomfortable questions, whether the man who sang so beautifully about love actually understood what love meant, whether his romantic image was masking something darker, whether he'd used his power and position to take what he wanted without considering the consequences. Achu 85 confronting his own mortality and watching his reputation get questioned in ways it never had been before. Smokey Robinson seems to have finally understood something crucial that eluded him his entire life. Loving two people at the same time wasn't the mistake.
She said, yeah, go ahead, baby. You can write some words on it. So I did. And she let me sing it at the beginning and the end of the show.
Humans are complicated, and feelings don't follow rules. And yes, It's possible to have genuine affection for multiple people simultaneously. The mistake was believing he could act on those feelings, could have both women, could maintain all those relationships without destroying everything and everyone around him. The mistake was prioritizing his own emotional needs over Claudette's dignity, over Diana's respect, over Berry's friendship. The mistake was thinking that because the feelings were real and powerful, the damage they caused was somehow justified or inevitable or beyond his control. This story isn't about forgiveness or redemption, because some damage can't be undone. Some betrayals cut too deep to ever fully heal. This centers on the brutal mathematics of desire and the price everyone pays when one person decides their feelings matter more than anyone else's pain. Claudette Robinson paid the price for Smokey's passion with Diana, endured betrayal after betrayal after betrayal while maintaining her dignity and grace, even when she had every right to burn everything down. Diana Ross paid the price by walking away from Smokey and into a relationship with Berry Gordy that meant choosing between two men she cared about. Berry Gordy paid the price through the loss of genuine friendship with Smokey, the kind of trust that can never be fully rebuilt once it's broken. Smokey Robinson paid the ultimate price, lost all three of them, spent the rest of his life trying to justify choices he made when he was young, and convinced that love could conquer any obstacle. The song, The Agony and the Ecstasy, wasn't just a hit single from 1975. It stood as Smokey's confession, his admission of guilt wrapped in a beautiful melody so people would listen to it and sing along without realizing they were witnessing a man's attempt to process the destruction he'd caused. If you found this story as complex and painful as we did, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more untold stories from Hollywood's past. Let us know in the comments what you think about Smokey's choices and whether some betrayals are simply unforgivable.